absolutely overwhelming images, the kind that send chills down your spine. A Ukrainian tank, or perhaps we should say a Western one, because it's not just any tank, it's a Leopard 2A4, dismantling, as we would say in Russia, but actually attacking, firing at civilian buildings in the town of Pakrovsk. This is an absolutely terrifying story, but watch out, be careful with a very unexpected ending. Especially for the Ukrainian side, which on one hand tells us a lot about how the situation is on the ground, and on the other about the breadth of the Ukrainian front. It also describes things in an extremely detailed way. I'm going to show you some images here. The full video, as usual, as well as the videos at the end of this whole story, they're on my Telegram channel. Let me remind you, Liusivaya or Liusivaya, all together, just like the rest of my social media. The link is in a pinned comment and the video description. What matters wasn't that long ago. Western media recorded a report of about 10 full minutes where, among other things, you can see the work of a Ukrainian tank apparently operating alone. I repeat, Western tank, a Leopard, no more and no less. That is to say, German tanks, indeed, as in the worst of dreams, have returned to the territory of the Russian Federation. To finish, how do you think the story will end, I ask? And in the meantime, this isn't just about the story itself, it's really a much broader issue. It came up after all these criticisms that the Russian Federation received for destroying entire cities in Ukraine. After having recorded many reports, one about Mariupol, I remember that one in particular. From Donbass, where civilians told me Ukrainian soldiers were firing at civilian buildings. And it's really not as simple as them wanting to destroy it so that the Russian Federation doesn't take it. This, according to my sources here on the ground in Donbass, of course, has a very clear military explanation when the fighting moves into the urban area, which is exactly what has happened with the town, now practically Russian, of Pakrovsk, formerly and soon to be again Krasnarmysk. Well, basically, these images, these screenshots that you see on one side are indeed living proof that the Ukrainian army is actually attacking the urban area, firing at and destroying its own buildings, absolutely civilian in nature. But almost more important, does that mean that the fighting has now definitely moved to the town of Pakrovsk? In this case, we're talking about the south and also the southeast, which are already out of Ukrainian control, and that's how Ukraine itself actually confirms it to us. That is, those videos I recorded for you at the time, talking about these Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups that were creating chaos in the city of Pakrovsk. They really are part of the past now, since at present, absolutely clearly and categorically we can say that the fighting is already intense in the town in question. Russia has already sent troops there. However, for now, the drones doesn't seem to have arrived in full because the tank couldn't just camp out like this so freely. Images that on one hand represent the catastrophe in civilian terms, and on the other hand, of course, speak of the catastrophe in military terms. As of today, Ukraine is allocating, and I'm not the one saying this, on one hand, my sources here in Donbass say it, and on the other hand, the Ukrainian side, Ukrainian sources are acknowledging it very broadly. Ukraine is moving everything it can, on one hand to the Pakrovsk front, and on the other hand to the Sumy front. And this has to do with the fact that, in immediate terms, they can't afford a major victory by the Russian Federation right now. However, victory is very close because Ukraine, as usual, oh my God, is digging its own grave. And in this sense, there are already quite a few complaints coming from several brigades. In particular, we mention here the 79th Ukrainian Brigade, who talk about the fact that they are being sent to carry out assaults. Moreover, very distant assaults, one after another. Absolutely absurd, since they say, well, we enter a town and it costs us a lot. In the end, we go in, even if just a little, but we really don't have what we need to hold those positions. So, well, we're not even talking about the long term, but rather a shorter term, the immediate term. That is, after taking position X or Y, in most cases only a few hours go by. And then Russia wipes us out from there, and we have to go back, for some reason we don't understand, to carry out another series of similar assaults. And all this considering that there is no chance of our survival in this area, in particular from the Donetsk front. Now we are talking about the city of Pakrovsk, soon to be the Russian city of Krasnoyarsk. But actually this has to do with and refers to the entire Donetsk front, at the very least, but I would almost say the entire Ukrainian front. Vladimir Zelensky. Meanwhile, and right away, let's get to the end of this story, which is the most unexpected part. Although perhaps the Ukrainian army should have imagined something like this, Vladimir Zelensky, meanwhile, is pretending that everything is absolutely normal. There is no problem at all. In addition, we are holding the Sumy region, which I remind you borders the Russian region of Kursk. That is, it is the result of the Ukrainian offensive that was carried out in the Kursk region. It resulted, oh my God, not in territorial losses for Russia, but rather in the medium term in dangerous, very dangerous territorial losses. Also regarding Ukraine, he says the same thing about Donetsk, when in reality this is confirmed by Western media themselves. In Pokrovsk, Ukrainian soldiers are having a really hard time. And this is where we reach the end of the story in question. You will be able to find all these images on my Telegram channel, because for about 5 months now, my channel has been suffering from almost constant censorship. I have to be very careful, and here I especially appreciate your support in whatever way it comes. And in the meantime, the end of the story, how do you think that Western Ukrainian tank ended up, that German creature that dared to return to the territory of the Russian Federation? And in fact, it didn't do it for just anything, but to dismantle things with bombings. The civilian buildings. An absolutely terrifying image, yes, but an ending that in fact leaves us with practically a whole lesson in karma. Indeed, the tank in question ended up being the victim of several attacks, in fact by drones from the Russian Federation. And now, it remains there standing, unable to harm anyone anymore. Like a reminder that it should never have set foot on Russian territory. That's first, but also second, the ending is even more unexpected. It's just that the report from which we've taken these images is absolutely terrifying, very explicit and very explanatory. In turn, it ended with the destruction of an entire deployment point. Personnel from the Ukrainian Army's 155th Brigade, which is precisely the one to which the tank in question belonged. Because, oh my God, it turns out that Western journalists, I understand that mostly pursuing the propaganda side of the story, apparently weren't too careful with what they published. And the Russian Federation ended up locating the brigade that recorded that report, which was presented to the Western public as heroic, but which I really think represents the saddest side of humanity. Anyway, it's not just that it's critical. The situation in Ukraine, generally speaking, on the Donetsk front, but also very specifically in the city of Pokrovsk, it's getting more complicated. Guess where? no less than the Western media are helping them with that.